Hello students, now I am going to teach you the second part of our last lesson, the Great Stone Face part 2, which is in unit 10. So open the page number 128. The years hurried on and brought white hairs upon the head of Ernest and made wrinkles across his forehead and furrows in his cheeks. He was an old man, but not in vain had he grown old. More numerous than the white hairs on his head were the wise thoughts in his mind, and Ernest had ceased to be obscure. Unsought for, undesired had come the fame which so many seek. He had become famous beyond the limits of the valley. College professors and even the active men of cities came from far to see and conversed with Ernest, and he received them with a gentle sincerity and spoke freely with them of whatever came uppermost or lay deepest in his heart or their own. While they talked together, his face would brighten unawares and shine upon them as with a mild evening light. So, now this is the Ernest who is working with his mother, who is very kind, very sympathetic, and he have lots of empathy. While Ernest had been growing old, God had granted a new poet to his earth. So now Ernest became the poet. He too was a native of the valley, but had spent the greater part of his life in distant cities, pouring out his sweet music everywhere. Neither was the Great Stone Face forgotten, for the poet had celebrated it in a poem. The song of this poet found their way to Ernest. He read them after his customary toil, seated on the bench before his cottage door. As he read, he lifted his eyes to the mountain. So now Ernest became the poet. He is a very native person, but for some reason he used to go to the cities, but there also in his poem there is all the time Great Stone Face. "O Great Stone Face," he said, "is not this man worthy to be your likeness?" The face seemed to be smiled but did not answer. It means he was very anxious to meet the great stone. Now it happened that the poet thought he lived so far away, had not only heard of Ernest but had thought much about his character, and wished to meet his man whose wisdom walked hand in hand with the noble simplicity of his life. One summer day, therefore, he arrived at Ernest's door, where he found a good old man holding a book in his hand, which he read, and then, with a finger between his lips, looked lovingly at the Great Stone Face. "Good evening," said the poet. "Can you give a traveler a night's shelter?" "Gladly," answered Ernest, and then he added, smiling, "I think I never saw the Great Stone Face look so hospitably at a stranger." So one summer what happened? In Ernest's door there was one man, one very old man, holding a book in his hand, and he wants to live for one day in his home, in the Ernest home. So he asked him. The poet sat down beside him, and he and Ernest talked together. Never before had the poet talked with a man like Ernest, so wise and gentle and kind. Ernest, on the other hand, was moved by the living images flung out of the poet's mind. So that poet was a very nice person, and he was very comfortable to talk with the Ernest. As Ernest listened to the poet, he imagined that the Great Stone Face was bending forward to listen too. He gazed into the poet's eyes, and when they were talking, Ernest felt like someone like that Great Stone Face is gazing at him. "Who are you, my gifted guest?" he asked. The poet laid his finger on the book that Ernest had been reading. "You have read this poem," said he. "You know me, then, for I wrote them. Again and again, Ernest examined the poet's features. He turned towards the gravestone face, then back. He shook his head and sighed. So now, all the time, that person was asking him, "Who are you?" And when he was asking that, he was just pointing his finger on the poem that I wrote that poem which is you are reading. That is the me. And when he was talking with him, all the time he was feeling like that gravestone face was gazing at them. "Why are you sad?" inquired the poet. "Because," replied Ernest, "all through life I have awaited the fulfillment of a prophecy, and when I read these poems I hoped that it might be fulfilled in you." "You hoped," answered the poet, faintly smiling, "to find in me to likeness of the gravestone face. I am not worthy to be likeness." So he said like, "Oh, it is likeness of me." So it is not like that poet was telling him. "And why not?" asked Ernest. He pointed to the book. "Are not those thoughts worthy? You can hear in them the distant voice of a heavenly song. But my life, dear Ernest, has not corresponded with my thoughts. I have had grand dreams, but they have been only dreams. Sometimes I lack faith in my own thoughts. Why then, pure seeker of the good and the true, should you hope to find me in the face of the mountain?" So now he was saying, "No, it is not like that. I am one person, and sometimes I also gave up on my thoughts. My dreams are very big, but sometimes I gave up on that." The poet spoke sadly, and his eyes were wet with tears. So too were those of Ernest. So they both were crying. There was a tear in them, in their eyes. At the hour of sunset, as had long been his custom, Ernest was to speak to a group of neighbors in the open air. Together he and the poet went to the meeting place. Arm in arm, from there could be seen the gravestone face. So they were just went to the meeting. Ernest threw a look of a familiar kindness round upon his audience. He began to speak to the people what was in his heart and mind. His words had power because they agreed with his thoughts, and his thoughts had reality and depth because they harmonized with the life which he had always lived. It was not mere breath that the preacher uttered. They were the words of a life of a good deeds, and selfless love was melted into them. The poet, as he listened, felt the life and the character of Ernest were a nobler strain of a poetry than he had even writer. His eyes filled with tears, and he said to himself that never was there so worthy a sage as that mild, sweet, thoughtful face with the glory of white hair diffused about it. So, the person was very kind, very familiar. They were both very comfortable to talk with, and that poet also felt so much like familiar with him at a distance, but clearly to be seen high up in the golden light of the setting sun appeared the great stone face with its white mist around it, like the white hairs around the brow of Ernest. At that moment, Ernest's face took on an expression so grand that the poet was moved to throw his arms up and shout, "Behold, behold, Ernest is himself the likeness of the great stone face." And when that Ernest was watching him, but that poet recognized Ernest. He saw the face, that great stone face, in the Ernest face. Then all the people looked and saw that what the poet said was true. The prophecy was fulfilled. But Ernest, having finished what he had to say, looked the poet's arms and walked slowly homeward, still hoping that some wiser and better man than himself would by and by appear, bearing a resemblance to the great stone face. So it means that poet recognized the Ernest face. It was matching with the great stone face. But Ernest refused to, he was refused refusing to accept that, but it was the only Ernest face which was matching with the gravestone face. So I hope you understand the story. We will meet in next video. Thank you.